welcome to another episode of not how to do Atkins low carb or Atkins diet quick hits. Why? Because it's the first one of another video series that I got asked to do by one of my viewers who is a low carb follower and is also an avid runner. And she had asked me to do some videos on marathoning, because if you don't know, I'm an active marathon runner. And today's episode is not so much when to do your first marathon, which is an obvious question for some, but where to do your first marathon. How do you select the best marathon course for your first marathon? And the first most important decision is one that's its proximity to your house. And the reason you'd want one that's close to you, i.e. within a easy drive from your home, is that it'll enable you to try the course at least once before the big day. That comfortability with the course, that you've seen the hills, there's no surprise hill or to discover on mile 20, makes all the difference in the world. The second most important decision maker is more environmental. This really gets to where do you want to run the marathon. You want to pick a course that's flat. You don't want to pick a grueling up the Pikes Peak Marathon in which you're running up a hill or exceptionally hilly location like the end of the Boston Marathon. There's another environmental concern, i.e. weather. You don't want to be picking a marathon course that's being ran during the hottest time of the year. The middle of July in Iowa is not the time to be running a marathon. You want to pick a cooler time in which the starting temp for the marathon is much closer to 40 to 50 degrees rather than 70 to 80 degrees with a lot of humidity. You also want to be thinking about picking a scenic marathon as opposed to one that runs around nondescript industrial blocks. I prefer one that has a variety of scenery, both from neighborhoods that you might be running through as well as park-like settings. And finally, you want a marathon that enables your friends and family to be able to drive around the marathon, to be able to see you at multiple times during the race as opposed to just the start and the finish. When I ran the Des Moines Marathon last year, my wife and I were able to see each other up to 5 times after the start of the marathon, in which she was able to give me my low carb endurance drink as well as giving me some encouragement. That made all the difference in the world to me, as it enabled me to have a personal cheering section throughout the whole course. Finally, the third most important reason or decision-making point is race support. You want a well-organized marathon. You don't typically, an inaugural marathon might be more likely to have some mistakes or some routing difficulties as opposed to one that's been around for quite a bit, and this is old hat to the race director. You want to make sure that the race that you pick has enough volunteers and supplies. Chicago Marathon last year, anybody in which they ran out of water? Probably not a very good first marathon. You want one that also has good spectator support. One that you're running for miles and miles without seeing anybody lining the sides of the road cheering you on is not probably the one that you want to be doing for your first one. If you're an experienced marathoner, perhaps having miles and miles without spectator support might not be a big thing. However, for the first timer, it gets kind of lonely out there if you're the only one that you can see. In addition to having spectators cheer you on, you also want to be concerned about the race field. You don't want to pick a race that's too small that you might not have a single competitor anywhere near you to either compete against or simply converse with throughout the course of the marathon. On the other side, you probably don't want one that's too large in which you're constantly running into somebody and having to battle for position for the first 5 to 8 miles of the race like you do in the Chicago Marathon in order to get some running room and some. You also probably would want to have one that has good expo to get the full marathon experience as well as a post-race celebration. That's the whole point of the marathon, is that they should be catering to your needs as a runner both beforehand so that you can buy your body glide so you don't chafe during the route, and afterwards so that you can refuel and replenish your racing experience. Also on the post-race side, you want one that gives out potentially a good medal. the first marathon you do, medal is always going to be important to show off for the rest of your life. You don't want one that either, one, doesn't give you a medal, or two, is so small that you're embarrassed to show it off to your friends. And finally, there's a few race details that you might want to pay attention to in also selecting your marathon race. One, you might want to select one that does not fill up too quickly, i.e. like the Twin Cities or the Chicago Marathon, in which you have to, one, pick the race almost 6 months ahead of time in order to gain a race entry spot. Other races, like the Des Moines Marathon or the Quad Cities Marathon, don't fill up until the final day, if they ever fill up. So you can even do a race day entry. And why is that important for a first-time marathoner? If you're anything like me, making that commitment to running that marathon is sometimes a difficult hurdle to leap. If you've never run a 20-mile run in practice, you might want to try that before you eventually sign on the dotted line, before you say you're ready. With a 6-month lead time, you have to know 6 months from now if you're going to be ready to run that marathon. I certainly wasn't to make that commitment. Maybe you can be. And finally, one of the trends in races right now is to either be headphone-free or to allow headphones with cautionary tales. If you like to listen to music, make sure you find one that allows you to enable to do that. Well, that concludes Marathoning Tips 101, and I hope you enjoyed this new series, and I'll be seeing you soon. Goodbye.